If you are 60 years old and earning $100,000 a year, the standard retirement tables say you need exactly $800,000 saved right now. Follow that number closely, and you tend to land in one of two places. Either you keep working 3 extra years you didn't actually need, or you retire with a $320,000 gap in your lifestyle that nobody warned you about. The problem isn't the math, it's the variable everyone plugs into it. Most of these benchmarks use your income as the anchor, but your income doesn't retire. Your spending does. Ask yourself which number actually pays your bills each month, the salary on your old pay stub or the mortgage and grocery total sitting in your checking account right now. That answer is the whole point of what follows. That one swap changes the whole picture. If your household spends about 60% of what you earn, which is common once the mortgage is gone, and the kids are off the payroll, the standard rule telling you to save 10 times your income overstates what you actually need by roughly 67%. I've sat with people who delayed retirement for years, chasing a number that was never built for their life. Today we're going through the savings tables the big brokerage firms actually publish, the ones that break your target down by how your money is invested, and then I'll show you the formula that turns any of those generic milestones into a figure that matches your spending instead of someone else's average. Two things are doing the real work here: the gap between what you earn and what you spend, and a savings lever the IRS opened up for 2026 that most people haven't even heard of yet. Fidelity's own benchmark says you should have 8 times your income saved by age 60 and 10 times by 67. That assumes you've been saving 15% of your paycheck the whole way through, and that Social Security ends up replacing about 45% of what you used to earn. Those are two big assumptions, doing a lot of quiet work behind a single number. Think about why that matters. A 15% savings rate compounding for 3 decades produces a very different outcome than someone who started at 35 or paused contributions during a rough stretch. The multiple on that table is a shortcut for a much longer story about consistency, not a promise. Fidelity's version is age-based. Roughly 1 times your income at 30, 3 times at 40, 6 times at 50, climbing to 8 times at 60. The Wall Street Journal and J.P. Morgan run a different table built around how your money is invested instead of your age. Hold an aggressive mix, something like 80% stocks and 20% bonds, and you might only need 5 times your income by 65. Sit in a conservative mix, closer to 30% stocks and 70% bonds, and that number jumps to 11.2 times, because your money simply isn't working as hard for you. The logic behind that gap is simple. Stocks have historically outpaced bonds over any 20-year stretch, so a portfolio leaning more into stocks can produce the same monthly income from a smaller pile of savings. That's never a guarantee in any single year, but it's the actual math behind why the multiple moves with your allocation instead of just your birthday. Here's the part that gets skipped over. These tables are built to protect the average American, and you are not an average. You are a specific set of habits, bills, and choices that no spreadsheet at a brokerage firm has ever seen. Most people default to the moderate column because it feels like the safe middle ground. What they don't realize is that playing it too safe too early comes with its own cost, a capital penalty. Get too conservative too soon, and you can end up needing almost 30% more saved just to generate the same monthly income a slightly more aggressive mix would have produced. The difference between comfortably covering a mortgage and a car payment and running the numbers so tight that one repair bill throws off the whole plan. If you're tired of generic calculators telling you that you're behind without knowing a single thing about your actual spending, stick around. The rest of this video is about building a number that's actually yours. But here's the catch with both of these tables. They assume you've been working steadily since your mid-20s without a single break in contributions. What happens if you started late, or your spending has always run well below your salary? That's the part nobody's benchmark accounts for. Let's say you earn $150,000 a year, but you actually spend $90,000 of it. The rest goes to taxes, savings, and things that stop the moment you retire, like a mortgage payment you'll have paid off by then. So why would you build your retirement number around $150,000, a figure you'll never actually need to replace? This isn't just a theoretical fix. By the time most Gen Xers reach their late 50s, the mortgage is close to gone, the kids have moved out, and a good chunk of what used to leave the paycheck every month has already disappeared. Benchmarking against income instead of spending means dragging along expenses that quietly vanished years earlier. This is where a simple pivot changes everything. Instead of anchoring to income, anchor to spending. Take your annual spending, divide it by 4%, the standard withdrawal rate planners use to figure out how large a portfolio needs to be. Then subtract whatever Social Security and any pensions already cover. What's left over is the number your personal savings actually need to produce. Vanguard and other major firms have studied that withdrawal rate for decades because it's built to survive a 30-year retirement, even through a down market or two. Here's what that looks like with real figures. Say your household spends $90,000 a year, and between two spouses, Social Security covers $45,000 of it. That leaves $45,000 a year your portfolio has to generate on its own. Divide $45,000 by 4%, and you land on $1,125,000. Compare that to the 10 times income rule, which would have told you to save $1,500,000 based on that same household's $150,000 salary. You just found $375,000 you don't actually need to grind out extra years for. Ask yourself honestly, are you saving for the life you actually live or for a number that describes someone else's paycheck? I used to tell people to just hit the 10 times mark to be safe, and I was wrong to leave it there. Oversaving isn't free. It costs you the healthiest years of your retirement while you're still sitting in an office you could have left. Enough is a real number, and it isn't always the biggest one on the page. I learned that lesson watching healthy, capable people stay chained to a desk long after their number had already been hit, just because nobody had ever told them it was allowed to be smaller. Now, if you're behind on this and the number still feels out of reach, 2026 gives you a real lever to pull. If you're between 60 and 63 years old, the IRS lets you contribute an extra $11,250 in catch-up contributions to your 401k on top of the regular limit. That's not a small bump. Contribute the full amount for 3 straight years starting at 60. And even with modest growth, you're looking at well over $33,750 added directly to your balance right when compounding has the least time left to work its usual magic. But there's a silent partner in this math that most of these tables conveniently ignore: the IRS. If that $1,125,000 is sitting in a traditional 401k, you don't actually have $1,125,000. You have $1,125,000 minus whatever the government decides to take when you pull it out. Keep that in mind before you compare your balance to anyone else's, retirement number or not. A $1 million traditional 401k sounds like a finish line. In practice, it behaves more like a joint account you share with the government, and your partner hasn't told you their exact cut yet. Every dollar you deferred into that account was never fully yours. It grew tax-deferred, which is a real benefit, but it comes due the moment you start pulling money out. Land in a 22% tax bracket in retirement and a $1 million balance behaves a lot more like $780,000 in actual spending power. This is the traditional versus Roth trade-off in plain terms. Traditional money gets taxed later. On withdrawals, you don't fully control the timing of once required distributions kick in at 73. Roth money gets taxed now, while you likely have more control over your bracket, and then grows completely untouched by the IRS from that point forward. Neither option is wrong on its own. The real mistake is never running the comparison at all, and quietly assuming your account balance is the same thing as your spending power. There's a fresh piece to this puzzle for 2025 through 2028. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act added an extra $6,000 deduction for anyone 65 and older, on top of the standard deduction you'd already claim. For a married couple both past 65, that's $12,000 off your taxable income each year, which directly changes how much of your withdrawal actually reaches your pocket. Picture two paths from here. In the fragile version, you treat your gross 401k balance as if it were your real spending power, get surprised by a tax bill you didn't plan for, and watch your safe withdrawal number shrink right when you can least afford it. In the sturdier version, you use the 2026 contribution limits to build some Roth exposure now, or you structure your withdrawals to make full use of that new senior deduction, and the effective multiple you need from your savings actually comes down. None of this happens by accident. It takes knowing the rule exists, which is exactly why the IRS spelled it out in Notice 2025-67 alongside the new 2026 limits. Here's the part that should worry you more than taxes, though. What happens if the market drops 20% the same year you retire? That's exactly where the conservative column in the Wall Street Journal's table, the one that's supposed to be the safe choice, quietly turns into a trap. Picture a downturn like 2008 hitting the exact year you turn 62. Not 5 years before you retire, and not 5 years after. The year itself. Someone who followed the moderate milestone, a mix of 60% stocks and 40% bonds, did everything the tables told them to do. They hit their $800,000 target right on schedule. But when the market drops and the grocery bill still shows up every week, they end up selling stock at the bottom just to cover ordinary living expenses. A portfolio that sells low in year one rarely gets the chance to fully recover because there's less of it left to ride the rebound. This is what's known as sequence of returns risk, and it's one of the few dangers that has nothing to do with your average return over 30 years. Two people can hold the exact same portfolio and end up with wildly different outcomes, purely based on which year the downturn happens to land. This is exactly what a cash buffer is built to prevent. Set aside roughly 2 years of spending in cash before you retire, and you give your invested money time to recover from a downturn without ever needing to touch it while it's down. For a household spending $90,000 a year, that means holding something like $180,000 in cash or short-term bonds before you ever touch the invested side of your accounts. That buffer effectively lowers the multiple you need from your invested assets, because you're not relying on that money to cover every expense the moment the market turns against you. Ask yourself, if the market fell 20% the month after you retired, what would you actually be forced to sell to cover next month's bills? There's a second cost hiding in a bad market year that catches people off guard: Medicare. The standard Part B premium for 2026 runs $202.90 a month. But if a market drop forces you to pull extra money out of a traditional account to cover expenses, that withdrawal can spike your reported income and trigger IRMA, the income-related surcharge that can push your premium as high as $689.90 a month. Without a cash buffer sitting between you and that decision, a single rough year can drain your portfolio roughly 15% faster than your original plan ever accounted for. There's one more lever most people never think to pull, and it can cut what you need saved by roughly 30% almost overnight. It has nothing to do with the stock market at all. It's about when you actually file for Social Security. Every year you delay filing for Social Security between 62 and 70, your monthly benefit grows by roughly 8%, on top of whatever the annual cost of living adjustment adds. That's not a small nudge. Stack those years together, and the difference between filing at 62 and waiting until 70 can be worth hundreds of dollars a month for the rest of your life. Picture a $2,000 monthly benefit at your full retirement age. File at 62 instead, and it drops to somewhere around $1,400. Wait until 70, and it climbs to roughly $2,480 for the exact same work history. So before you rush to file the moment you're eligible, ask yourself what those extra years of waiting might actually be worth to you over a retirement that could easily run 25 or 30 years. Here's the part that actually matters for your savings target. The more of your spending floor Social Security covers, the less your personal portfolio has to produce. Delay your filing date, and the required multiple from your own savings quietly drops, because the government is now shouldering a bigger share of the load every month. Now, if you or your spouse ever worked a job with a government pension, a lot of you were told for years that you'd lose a chunk of your Social Security because of it. That was true once. It is not true anymore. In January 2025, the Social Security Fairness Act repealed the Windfall elimination provision, and the government pension offset completely. If you watched a video from 2023 warning you about losing your benefit over a teacher's pension or a fire department pension, that information is outdated. You're likely somewhere between $500 and $1,000 a month richer than you thought. I talked to a retired teacher last week who genuinely believed she'd only see about $400 a month from Social Security because of the old penalty. When I showed her the 2025 repeal, her whole retirement date moved up by 2 years, right there in the conversation. She had planned her entire remaining career around a number that hadn't been true for over a year, simply because nobody had told her the rule had changed. So if the numbers in this video still feel a little scary, especially if you got a late start, how do you actually sit with that, instead of letting it talk you out of planning at all? There's a bias working against you here, and it isn't really about the math anymore. Psychologists call it loss aversion. We're wired to fear the small chance of running out of money far more than we fear the near certainty of spending our healthiest years still clocking into a job we've outgrown. This isn't a character flaw. It's the same instinct that made sense when a bad decision could threaten your actual safety. It doesn't know the difference between a genuine emergency and a retirement account statement that dipped for a quarter. If $1 million still doesn't feel like enough to you, even after everything we've walked through, that's a normal reaction. Headlines about inflation are built to make any number feel small. Feeling that way doesn't mean you're being greedy. It usually means you're being protective, which is a completely different thing. Here's a smaller way to test it. Instead of staring at a 30-year mountain that never stops moving, look at just the year ahead of you. The 2026 cost of living adjustment for Social Security landed at 2.8%. Say your Social Security check covers $30,000 of the $45,000 you spend in a typical year. A 4% draw on even $375,000 in savings covers the remaining $15,000 without you touching the rest of your portfolio at all. If your Social Security, plus that modest draw, covers your basic needs for that 1 year, you've already won the part of this game that actually matters: survival. Everything past that is lifestyle, not necessity. That's a very different feeling than staring at a lump sum and wondering if it's big enough to last 40 years. One tells you whether you're safe this year. The other just tells you to be afraid a little longer, about a future nobody can actually predict down to the dollar anyway. It's a useful way to hold your portfolio in your head generally. It isn't a scoreboard measuring your worth. It's a tool that does a job covering your life, and a tool doesn't need to be bigger than the job in front of it. So where does that leave you? Stop measuring your target against your income and measure it against what you actually spend, because that's the number that has to survive retirement, not your old paycheck. If you're between 60 and 63, remember the extra $11,250 catch-up contribution sitting on the table for 2026 and use it while it's available to you. And if anyone in your household worked a government job, go back and recheck your Social Security estimate now that the Windfall Elimination provision and government pension offset are gone for good. Run those 3 checks against your own numbers, not the version of your finances that existed 5 years ago, because both the tax code and the Social Security rules have moved since then. There's no such thing as a perfect number. You don't need a perfect forecast to retire well. You need a number that matches the life you're actually living, and a plan for the handful of risks that could knock it off course. Markets move, tax law shifts, and life throws in a few surprises nobody's spreadsheet saw coming. But there is such a thing as a safe enough number, one built on your actual spending instead of someone else's average, with a cash buffer, a filing strategy, and a tax plan sitting underneath it. If this gave you a path toward retirement that doesn't just mean working until you physically can't anymore, hit subscribe. Next up, we're walking through exactly how the 2026 tax brackets affect what you'll actually keep from every withdrawal.